Thank you.
Thank you, Marvin, for that very lovely introduction. I was reading his speech while he was giving it. I also want to thank Betty Babbage for giving me an invitation back to another night of Lindblom memory. Thank you. I would like to take you back tonight to a time before you were born and before Lindblom was built. And I'd like to tell you about Lindblom's neighborhood. And since this is the last time you will ever hear your old senile principal speak before he goes into the land of the setting sun, I'll tell you something about him also. The year is 1914. At that time, my mother ran a little grocery store at 60th and Wood. My father was a policeman. We lived in back of the store, and I attended Earl School, 3 half blocks east of Lindblom. Also at that time, the streets were paved with cedar logs. They were little logs about 8 inches long, placed side by side with the end grain up, and dirt filled in between the little logs. In other words, it was like a wooden cobblestone street. But later that year, the city pulled up all those little logs, and they put them on the parkway, and they paved the streets as you know them today. And all the neighbors, including little Harry, hauled those logs in our woodshed, which we burned in Ben Franklin's great invention, the stove, and around which I dressed on many a cold winter morning. Also at that time, there was no Wollicott. It was named for what I consider America's greatest president. It was called Lincoln Street. And there was no Damon. It was called Roby Street. And the B&O tracks west of Lindblom were on the ground. My buddies and I used to take our net and buckets, and we'd seine the creeks alongside the tracks for pollywogs and frogs and salamanders, and bring them home and put them in our backyard aquarium. And on the way home across that great big empty prairie, we'd pick up a brown or green garter snake and put in our pocket to be used later on to scare the girls. Also at that time, there were about a dozen frame houses on Lindblom's lot. And I saw those houses raised off of their foundation, floated on 2 great big timbers about 18 inches square, the length of the house. And they were rolled down the street on rollers about 8 inches in diameter and about 4 feet long. The men used to take them from the back of the house and put them in the front as the house was pulled along by a steel cable, which in turn was hooked into a turnstile, and the turnstile in turn was hooked into a manhole in the street for traction. And 2 horses pulled that tongue of that turnstile around, stepping over the cable each time they went around, and the house slowly moved down the street to the new foundation in an empty lot. After all those houses were cleared off, they dug the foundation with a big scoop about 3 feet across that again was pulled by 2 horses. In fact, in those days, 60% of the traffic on the road were horse-drawn vehicles, and a few motorized vehicles were mostly trucks because people couldn't afford Henry Ford's $500 Tin Lizzie at that time because they're only making about $600 a year. But remember, in 1914-15, the dollar had 100 cents in it, not 2 or 3 cents like it has today. Well, after they dug that foundation, and I went down 8 feet. That was pure beach sand down there. And I don't know if you know it, but underneath the main corridor, there's a basement about 8 feet deep, where we used to store all the broken chairs and broken tables that some of you guys created in your spare moment. That sand down there was pure beach sand. Mr. Palmer lived in the neighborhood at the same time. I didn't know him as a kid, but we talked about it one day, and we both came to the same conclusion, that evidently Lake Michigan came way up past Western Avenue, probably 1,000 or so years ago, because the lake was higher then. After that, my mother sold the store. We moved to an apartment across from Ogden Park. And I didn't want to transfer again because that was her third store. And I had gone to 3 grammar schools. And she always moved in the summer, so I never got a transfer. So I had to go to the principal's office and take a little reading and writing test, a reading arithmetic test. And each time they put me up a grade. So I graduated from Earl School at the tender age of 12 years. In fact, Lindblom took 4 years to build, from the time the houses were removed until it was opened. I was a sophomore in Tilden at the time Lindblom was opened for the first time. After graduating from Tilden, I went to work. And I worked at 4 different jobs that year. I worked in Steel Weddle's plant on the Chicago River. In those days, canned goods came in wooden boxes. My job was to take down those wooden boxes, put them along the floor, open the top, and a bunch of women came along and took the old rusty labels off and put the new early June pea labels on. The people who were eating that food in the fall thought they were getting a spring crop, but it had already been in the warehouse 2 years then, rusted. That's one of the little scams that's put over on the American people. However, I think our turnover is faster today, and that doesn't happen. I only lasted a couple of weeks. I nearly broke my back, lifting 48 cans of food in wooden boxes up and down an 8-foot ladder all day long. So I quit after 2 weeks, and I sold men's shoes near the entrance to the Chicago Stockyards at 42nd and Halston. Now, shoes come in codes. For instance, a 485 size means it's an 8.5 D. The middle number is a size, a 0 or a 5 on the right side is half or even, and the first number is a width. So a 485 is an 8.5 D. And then there's a 41 dash size. That's a 9.5. You subtract 32 from all those numbers and you get the size. That's made so you can sell shoes. If a man comes in with a 9 foot and all you have left in stock is an 8.5 and a 9.5, you're going to sell him a pair of shoes, and I've done it many times. You put the 8.5 on, if he says that pinches his big toe, so you say, maybe your foot's a little swollen. We'll try a half size larger. So you give him the only size you have, a full size larger. He stands up and says, that's fine. He's got a half size larger than you need, but it feels good. He's satisfied, and you've sold a pair of shoes. Well, after 4 different jobs that year, including peddling mail, I didn't like any of them. You peddle the same route day after day and the same thing. It's the most monotonous job I ever had. I told my father I didn't like any of them. He gave me great vocational counseling, and I can remember his words as if he spoke them yesterday. He said, "Why don't you become a teacher? They don't do anything." Well, that sounded pretty good for a 17-year-old. So I went 2 years to Chicago Normal College at 68th and Stewart, because it was only 2 years in those days.